story of this book is really quite amazing. So I thought we would begin. We all know, I think, that Julianne Moore won the Oscar after being nominated 4 times for her portrayal of Alice in this book. But it was very unlikely that she would ever get to do this, because it's very unlikely that this book would become the bestseller that it did, because she started writing it, couldn't find a publisher, and sold it out of the trunk of her car. So I'm going to take it from there. Tell everybody how you actually came to write this book and how difficult it was to actually get it to the shelves.
Okay, thank you. All right, I hope I do a good job and I don't kill the BYOB.
I
know. Pressure here. So my background's in neuroscience. I used to do brain research, and I actually never did brain research on Alzheimer's. I spent most of the years, I was at Harvard, McLean Hospital, and the NIH. I was researching the molecular neurobiology of drug addiction. My interest in Alzheimer's started with my Nana. So my grandmother was 85 when she walked to the bowling alley in the middle of the day, in the middle of the night, thinking it was the middle of the day, wondering where her bowling team was. And so my family was like a lot of families in that we knew that my grandmother was becoming quite forgetful. She was leaving the keys in the door, she was leaving the tea kettle on the burner, which was still on. She couldn't do the checkbook anymore. My dad took that over. But we assumed that this was a normal part of normal aging. And so we just said, well, Nana's just getting old. And we love her and didn't want to jump to Alzheimer's because of that, that denial, that disconnect of like, you don't want that to happen to someone you love, so you don't go there. Mm-hmm. And then also my grandmother was a very smart, independent woman. My grandfather died back when I was 7. And so she'd been living alone, very smart, intellectually facile. I think that she moved around her symptoms with a lot of creativity for a while. And she's tough. She wasn't a complainer. So she wasn't bringing any of what was going on to our attention either until the walk to the bowling alley. So this was literally the phone call that woke the whole family up and thought, this isn't a normal part of normal aging. She's so confused and disoriented. And so after a series of doctor's appointments, she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And so my grandmother had 9 children, and they rallied together to take care of her. And by they, I mean her daughters. Mm-hmm. So 5 daughters, 4 sons, and it was the daughters who became her caregivers. And interestingly, after we all showed up to take care of her, she sort of let go a bit. Yeah. It was like we were sort of holding her now, so she didn't have to sort of fake it anymore. So she sort of declined pretty rapidly after that.
But what made you think you could write her story?
Yeah.
Write the story. You're a researcher, you're a scientist.
Yeah. So I'm there not being her primary caregiver because I'm one of the youngest grandkids, but I'm there to, witness what's going on and to spend time, and was really unnerved by it. So I started reading everything I could about Alzheimer's to understand it. And everything was written, and I learned a lot of helpful information, but everything was written by a clinician or a scientist or a caregiver or a social worker. And I realized, well, these are all views from the outside looking in. What does it feel like to have it? Like, right. What's going on with my Nana? Right. And that question of what does it feel like to have it, I couldn't find an answer to it anywhere, and I couldn't get an answer from it with her. She, she didn't know who I was pretty quickly. Right. She'd forgotten her married name. She didn't recognize herself in the mirror. I could see her studying her face in the mirror and being upset. I didn't know how to be with someone with Alzheimer's. I didn't know how to do it yet. And so I had this idea. It was 1998. I was a strategy consultant for biotech and pharmaceutical companies, not a novelist. And I had this sort of intuitive understanding that literature is a place where you can explore empathy. And so I said to a colleague at work, someday I want to write a book about a woman with Alzheimer's and tell it from her perspective, from the very first symptoms. Because we missed the beginning of my Nana's Alzheimer's.
So you're a scientist, you're working, you're a strategist, you're not a novelist.
No.
You have this idea, you want to tell a story.
Yeah.
How did it start? You sit down, you start writing a book?
No, I got divorced.
Okay.
Yeah. So It's funny how sometimes you need your life to totally shake up and flip you upside down, and you are completely
That's
disoriented.
another conversation for a different different BYOB.
So it was 2004. I was divorced, unemployed. I had quit my job to be home with my daughter, and instead of going back to work, I asked myself the question if I could do anything I wanted, and I didn't have to care what anyone thought. What would you do? Write the book.
Very good question. What would I do if I didn't care what anybody thought? If money
Didn't
wasn't
have to
an
matter.
issue, right?
Truly, yeah.
What would I do? And you said write this book.
I said I want to write this book.
Okay, that's a really good question. So you wrote this book.
Yeah.
No one wanted to read this book.
No. So when you finish the book, you query literary agents, and I sent out 100 query letters, and it was quickly. I heard back from like 50 to 70. Dear author, no thank you. 4 asked to read the book. I'm still waiting to hear back from 1. 2 immediately said, I just think Alzheimer's is too scary. It's too depressing. General readers aren't going to want to read about this, so no thanks. And then the last one couldn't get over my background. He says, you've got a PhD in neuroscience from Harvard. Why are you writing fiction? Go write a nonfiction book about Alzheimer's, and I'll consider that. But I had a novel, so it was either stick it in a drawer and go back to doing brain research or consulting or something I was actually trained to do, or give this book a shot. So in the summer of 2007, I self-published it with a company called iUniverse, which is now part of Author Solutions. And it was at the time $450, so not a huge investment. And it was a print on demand. So they would list it at Amazon, and I could buy them at 50% off and sell them out of the trunk of my car.
And that's what's really interesting to me. So you ask this question, you write the book, you send out, you get turned down by everyone.
Yeah.
You self-publish, you buy a lot of the copies yourself, you put them in the trunk of the car, and you start driving.
And just giving them to people, like, if you read this, will you write a review up at Amazon or somewhere public? I don't even know. Like, Facebook wasn't really a thing yet. We're starting to. It was, I think MySpace was bigger then. So yeah, I was giving them to book, like, oh, are you in a book club? Would you guys read this?
And what were you hoping for? What were you hoping would happen? That you'd give it to the right person? What did you want?
I was giving myself a year because I wasn't, again, I'm not feeding my family on this at all. So it's, I was giving myself a certain amount of time, and I was hoping to create a loud enough buzz to get a literary agent and get into the traditional publishing market. Like, I wanted a publisher.
You wanted a publisher.
Yeah.
So what happens? A person picked it up, read it, and you got another call.
Yeah, I mean, there were a bunch of things going on in this sort of guerrilla marketing period. So Beverly Beckham at the Boston Globe read it, and she wrote a review in the Sunday Globe, which was amazing. She put down Stephen King to read this self-published book and never went back to his.
Okay, go ahead. Keep going.
So rude. A Massachusetts author named Julia Fox Garrison, who had originally self-published her memoir called Don't Leave Me This Way, she wrote into the columnist saying, thank you for portraying a self-published writer in such a positive way. Turns out she had gone from self-published to HarperCollins. So Beverly said, well, that's what Lisa's trying to do. Let me introduce you. So that introduction led to actually an amazing friendship with Julia. But Julia introduced me to her agent. Her agent became my agent. And she sold the book to Simon & Schuster. But also, meanwhile, my dad's really large family. That's one thing. But my mom has cousins and people that I've never even met. There's another large Irish-Italian side over there. And it turns out she has a cousin whose husband is like the director of sales at Simon & Schuster. Would have been really helpful to know that, Mom, like, earlier in this process. But he read the book, which is amazing. He gets the self-published novel of his wife's cousin's daughter, who's a scientist. He passed it along to a man at Simon & Schuster whose mother had early onset Alzheimer's. And so I got a call from him the same day I signed with my agent. And the book actually went to auction. 3 publishing houses wanted it, and they bid on it for 2 days, and it went to Simon & Schuster in the end.
So I think what's so great about Lisa's story is that I think pretty much everybody I meet at some point says they think they have some book inside of them, but they don't know how to get started. They worry that they don't have the right agent, that they won't be able to compete, that they need to have a television show in order to compete.
Or that you need an MFA to do it, because like
Yeah.
you need to be trained somehow to write. Yeah.
And I think that what's so exciting to me is you sat down to do it. That's always the hardest part in the first part.
Show up.
And showing up, but then writing, starting to write, and then saying, and not getting deterred when everybody told you no. I'm a big believer in never listening to the word no.
Yeah, and you know it's funny when I look back on it. It wasn't a I'll show them I'm doing this. It wasn't an aggressive like fight of it. It was the no was more like, huh. I thought that was going to be the way this would happen. I guess there must be another way. I just believed that this is going to happen, and I don't really know where that came from. It just felt true the whole time. Like, I'm supposed to do this. This is going to happen. And every time I got a no, it was just, huh. No, I didn't see myself as an author necessarily. Oh, yes. This is what I get to do. I feel a very strong sense of purpose with doing this. And as I was doing the research, I came to know 27 people living with young onset or early stage Alzheimer's, people like Sandy Olds. Sandy Olds is the woman who consulted with Julianne Moore for the movie. So these are people living with Alzheimer's, and I was spending time with them every day through email, live chat, on the phone, in person. Two things happened. I felt a huge responsibility to tell the truth under these imagined circumstances, to really honor what they're going through. And then the other was that if I did this well, this book would have an opportunity to change what people think about when they think about Alzheimer's, because these people I came to know aren't included in what gets talked about when people talk about Alzheimer's. They are now, but back then in 2004, 5, 6, Alzheimer's was all about you picture Alzheimer's and it's someone elderly who's dying of Alzheimer's, end stage. Well, what about all the people living with Alzheimer's? What does that look like and sound like? And if you're trying to raise awareness for funds for a cure, and you're imagining someone who's in end stage dying, that's unfortunately a really easy population to ignore. You don't really get people excited about finding a cure for someone who's in end stage in a nursing home. But if Alzheimer's looks like Julianne Moore, which it does, millions of people are living with Alzheimer's, then this becomes a conversation. I knew that the book would have a chance to be part of a conversation.
One of the things that we've tried to get out with Still Alice and the book is that a woman in her early 60s is twice as likely to get Alzheimer's as she is to get breast cancer.
People don't know that.
People have no clue.
Yeah.
They have no clue that 2/3 of those living with Alzheimer's are women, and 2/3 of all of those that are caring for people with Alzheimer's, not to mention all the other diseases, are also women. So they drop out of their jobs. They have to take care of somebody 24/7.
Yes.
Families are, quote, wiped out financially, spiritually. Well, we all have a brain, and there's a lot that can happen to our brain or our children's brains, and this is a disease that's coming right at women. And I think that the movie has really kind of changed, perhaps, has kind of changed the image of what Alzheimer's is, who it can happen to. Are you surprised at the success of the film?
It's been so rewarding, so much fun. So rewarding in that it is doing what the book did, but in a much bigger way, which is dragging Alzheimer's out of the closet and like into what I used to say, into people's living rooms where they have wine and cheese and book club. Now it's into these movie theaters. And it's doing a couple of things. I mean, people who are touched by Alzheimer's, who've been sort of, alienated and marginalized and stigmatized and not really telling everyone, oh, my husband has it or my mom has it, keeping it kind of private. They now go to the movie theater and see it. It gives them permission now to say, oh, I'm living with that too. And so it is inviting a bigger conversation. And we've seen this with cancer and HIV and even heart disease, where once you start to talk about it as a community and not be afraid of it and not stigmatize it, then you can start to see treatments that lead to survivors.
Why do you think the women who are here and others should care about Alzheimer's if it hasn't affected their family?
Well, I mean, what you just said is that if you live long enough, it's probably going to, whether it affects your brain or someone you love, the numbers are staggering. And so
it's not a normal part of aging.
It's not a normal part of normal aging.
It's not a normal part of aging. And it's not forgetting your keys.
No, it's not just forgetting your keys. And by the way, because you're all afraid of this now, so when you forget where you put your keys, it's probably because you didn't pay attention to where you put them in the first place, because you're doing 20 things at once.
And stress does, though. One of the things that people have said
stress
to
will
me,
hurt your memory.
What can you do since we don't have a cure for Alzheimer's, what can people do? And one of the things that is you can actually live brain healthy.
Yes.
Stress has a huge impact, a huge association with Alzheimer's.
Especially chronic stress will biologically impair your memory.
So talk about that a little bit, because I think probably a lot of the people here are under stress.
Okay. So, so stress response is your body reacts to stress in a way that's very healthy normally. So, whatever the stressor is, your brain releases a hormone which acts on your adrenal glands that are on your kidneys, and that releases a steroid in your body called cortisol, and that does a lot of things to help fight. Like, get your heart pumping. It gives you sort of the focus to react to whatever's going on. But it also goes back to your brain, it loops back, and it turns off the neurotransmitter that triggered the hormone that acted on your adrenals. So it's a negative feedback loop. If you're chronically stressed, what happens is those receptors in your brain that the cortisol acts on to shut the whole thing off become desensitized and downregulated. And so your brain doesn't shut off, and it keeps activating the cortisol. You just keep dumping it into your bloodstream, and so you're constantly in fight or flight, and that's bad for your immune system, it's bad for your cardiovascular system, it's bad for your blood pressure, and it's bad for your memory. So the not turning, the receptors getting desensitized in your brain, there's also a place in your brain called the hippocampus. Some of the receptors that get downregulated are called NMDA receptors. You need those to create short-term and long-term memory. So you can have memory issues due to stress.
Which I think is really important. One of the things we've tried to get out with the book, the film, one is that women should be focused on this, as I said, that stress does have an impact on people who get Alzheimer's, as does depression. You know, that there is a link between depression and Alzheimer's, and women are affected more often than not by depression. One of the things we're trying to kind of understand with the whole Wipe Out Alzheimer's challenge is to study women's brains. Why are they getting this more than men? If it actually is in your system for 20 years before it's apparent, what's going on with women in their 40s and 50s? Wow, is there a connection to hormone? What effect does hormone replacement have on a woman's brain? All of these things that we don't really know because we haven't studied women's brains, which is really incredible.
Right. Well, we haven't had the tools to study those kinds of changes until recently, but these are the right questions to be asking for sure. Absolutely.
So everybody asks me all the time, should I take fish oil? Should I take turmeric? Should I take vitamin D? Should I drink wine? Should I stop drinking coffee? Should I meditate? I'm like, I don't know.
Is it stressing you out? The list is stressing you out. Well, the thing I tell people in terms of the risk of Alzheimer's and like this idea that, well, there's no cure, so you can't do anything. That's such a myth we need to bust.
Okay, bust it.
So think of the risk of Alzheimer's as a seesaw scale. And so we're going to pile the risk factors on this arm, and when that hits the floor, you're going to show symptoms of dementia, and you're going to be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. So in the book and the movie Still Alice, she has a very rare form of the disease. She gets a single genetic mutation that's going to cause Alzheimer's. You put that on the arm, and boom, it hits the floor. But for 98% of people with Alzheimer's, that's not the case. You can inherit, there's a gene that increased your risk of Alzheimer's called ApoE4. You can have a bad copy of ApoE4 from mom and dad, and your scale can do something just like this. So you still don't have Alzheimer's. Cholesterol, high cholesterol drives the production of amyloid beta, the thing that ends up causing the plaques that causes Alzheimer's. So if you have high cholesterol, can you do something about that? Yeah, you can't do anything about the genes you've inherited, but you can do something about that. And so with cholesterol, there's statins, there's exercise, there's Mediterranean diet. So what's good for the heart, good for the brain? We probably already know that, but it really is true. Type 2 diabetes. So again, if your sugar intake is out of control for years and years and years on end, you might end up with type 2 diabetes. Well, even if you do, can you manage type 2 diabetes? Yes. So there are ways you can lift that arm even then. Concussion, especially if you've gone unconscious, that will tip it. So wear your seatbelt, wear a helmet. So there are things that you can do in your day-to-day life. So the antioxidants. So once you have that amyloid beta thing going on, the 20 years prior to diagnosis, if you've got some of that happening, the amyloid beta is sort of like a splinter in the brain in some ways. Like if you've got a foreign object in your body, like your body will start to attack that site. It'll send lots of inflammatory molecules. If you roll your ankle, it swells, right? Like if you've got something going on that shouldn't be there, the body kind of sends this inflammatory response to fix it. But it can't always fix what's going on. So in the brain with the amyloid beta, it sends all this inflammatory response to try to get rid of that, to clean it up. It's a war at the synapse. And it never is able to clean it up, and it causes some problems. So this is where the antioxidants come into play. So the red wine, the dark chocolate, that stuff will help combat the inflammatory response that's going to ultimately lead to the neurons deciding to kill themselves. So you can prevent the cell death in Alzheimer's by getting rid of some of that inflammation that's going on.
One of the things, as I said, we've been asking people to do is instead of maybe having a book club, as I said, have a brain club. Okay. So that you actually begin to get informed about what Alzheimer's is and isn't. How is it? There are different forms of dementia. Yeah. How do you support someone who is a caregiver? So often people who are in caregiving situations, be it somebody who has Alzheimer's, be it a special needs child, be it a parent with strokes, they end up getting sicker than the person they're actually caring for. Yeah. Lauren Miller is here, and she has a great organization called Hilarity for Charity that she does, which supports caregivers and funds families to help them hire a caregiver, because so often those people get sick. Yes. And people don't, as you say, know where to go, how to get help. One of the other things that people have asked me a lot is, what is the effect of meditation? How does that help? And a friend of mine here introduced me to a meditation teacher, and he was saying, like, could you get out the word that it's actually socially conscious today to meditate? And that's the only thing we know that can really calm your brain. And that also is a really important tool, because it affects stress, and it's a way for you to calm the brain, unlike anything else that you do. Do you believe in that?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I just did a 200-hour yoga teacher training last year, and did a lot of meditating and fought it tooth and nail at first. Like, I can't sit still and I can't stop thinking, and but yeah, man, that chatter does not want to shut up, and that is energy spent on stuff that isn't real. And when you can quiet that, the stress levels, and like we talked about, stress is really working against your memory.
So the idea that there's nothing you can do is false.
Right.
That's a myth.
Yes.
So so you want people to understand that Alzheimer's can happen to them. As I said, that if you're a woman in your 50s and 60s, you should be concerned about this. We're always told we should be concerned about breast cancer, but the fact to me that came out, you're twice as likely in your early 60s to get breast cancer. And then young people say, well, I don't need to worry about this. And I'm like, yes, you do, because if your mother is in her 60s and she gets breast cancer and you're just getting married and you're having kids, somebody's going to have to take care of that parent, because a nursing home and after-tax costs of taking care of somebody with Alzheimer's is exorbitant.
Yes.
So also the idea that your diet, I think that's a really important thing to get across. Meditation, diet, a brain club, a support. One of the other things is if you're isolated and you're not in community, that also affects your brain health. I think that's a really important thing for people to understand.
Absolutely. Well, right. If you're isolated or lonely, that leads to symptoms of depression typically. Your brain is, if you were in a brain scan, it would light up less if you're a person who doesn't have a lot of social interaction. You're not using as much of your brain as if you were in a group like this. It really works different areas of your brain to be able to imagine what you're feeling or thinking, or to listen to what you have to say and respond. It really is so good at exercising the neurons in your brain to be around other people.
What about brain games, crossword puzzles? I
Yes.
can't do crossword puzzles, but everybody comes up to me and says, should I be doing these brain games? I'm on 5 apps. I'm meditating. I'm doing a brain game. I'm eating chocolate.
So while you're doing the brain game,
while I'm driving,
stuffing your face with chocolate. So here's the deal with this. So what are they trying to get you to do, really, when they say, use it or lose it, exercise your brain? All right. So picture the neurons in your brains as if they're roads leading to pieces of information. And so imagine you're trying to remember my name and you only know one thing about me. So say author of Still Alice, Lisa Genova. And now say you have Alzheimer's and you have, picture Alzheimer's as a roadblock. So all of that amyloid beta goo and the attack on the, it's all, just picture it as a roadblock. So now someone's saying like, oh, what's the name of that author who wrote Still Alice? And so you're searching for it in your brain, you get on the road, author of Still Alice, but you can't get to the other side because there's a roadblock. So you've forgotten me. Forever. I'm gone. But what if you learn more information about me? This is building more neural connections. It's paving more roads. So say you learn, well, she came to BYOB and spoke with Maria, and she wrote Still Alice became a movie that won Julianne Moore an Oscar, and she wrote another book called Inside the O'Briens. So say you learn 10 things about me, and you have Alzheimer's, and you've been diagnosed and you're on Aricept, and you've now got 9 roadblocks. And someone asks you a question about me, who's the author of Still Alice? Well, you can't get to me by that main road. So think of like Main Street, and it's paved really well, and the lights are there, and there's street signs everywhere. So that's the quickest way to me, but it's blocked. Okay. Well, you've learned, you've got one road accessible, and it might take you a while. It's kind of a dirt, bumpy road. Like you haven't, like the more you travel roads, so this is like, might make sense to you too, like the more you practice something, the faster you can get to that information, right? That's like the more you travel a road, the more maintained it is, you'll get there quicker. So this road might be tough, but you'll get there eventually. So, oh, author of Still Alice, you've learned 10 things, 9 are blocked, you can still remember who I am. So this is the crossword puzzle thing is, it kind of accomplishes that in some kinds of ways because whatever information it's asking you to recall, like maybe you're activating a road that might, become defunct because you haven't used it in a long time. Like, so if you don't travel roads for 30 years, they might close down. Your brain won't really use that neural pathway anymore. But if you use it, it'll be maintained. Or if you look, even better, learn something new. So the crosswords aren't my favorite example. It's like, go learn to play the piano, or go take a dance class, or read a new book, or learn something. And that will really give you new connections, because when you're learning something, you're also bringing in a lifetime of experience. And how does this relate to what I already know? And that is connecting everything.
Learn a new language. I'm like, oh my God.
Well, you don't have to do You don't have to do anything.
But I mean, so
Yeah.
they say like also like if you brush your teeth with your right hand, try your left hand. If you always write with your right hand, do other things so that you're actually challenging your brain to think differently. Is that actually true?
Yeah, you can do a little of that, but that's not really gonna, in the day-to-day practicality of like, if you do become someone who will have Alzheimer's in your brain, the right and left hand of the toothpaste isn't really going to save you a lot, because it's not like, that's not going to impact your day-to-day life as much as if you're trying to remember, if you're trying to function here.
Right.
It's about, well, I'm trying to remember something about a particular person, or something that I need to talk about. And if you have 7 or 20 or 100 different ways of getting to that person's name or that piece of information, you're going to be very agile with your Alzheimer's for a long time. So someone like Sandy Olds can get up in front of everyone last night and give a speech.
That was incredible. Sandy was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in her late 40s.
Yes.
Right? And she was the technical advisor to Julianne Moore on the film Still Alice. And she gave a speech last night. She had, like the Julianne Moore character in the film, she had a highlighter.
Yeah.
I was watching her. She had a highlighter as she was speaking. But if you didn't know that she had been diagnosed with Alzheimer's, she was sitting there at the table, you would think she's like everybody in this room. So the image that you're diagnosed with Alzheimer's and you're done is also a myth.
Yes.
And so just kind of doing some of these things, like what she's also doing, is trying to stay in life, so to speak, as long as possible.
Yes, and so what she's doing on a daily basis is she is getting around all of those roadblocks and getting where she needs to go, working really hard. And so people with Alzheimer's it's exhausting. If you've ever worked mentally to think of something that you can't think of right away, it's tiring, right? You're like, oh, what's his name? Or how do I do this? Or how do I get that? Or what is it? If you are doing that all day long, it's exhausting. But if you've got a lot of neural connections, we call it cognitive reserve, you can dance around that those Alzheimer's roadblocks for a while and really still function.
So one of the things we wanted to get across with this series of Bring Your Own Brain is that it's really important. We know so much about why it's important to be physically in shape, right?
Yeah.
But we know less about how to be cognitively in shape. And it's kind of, we have 10,000 people turning 65 every day, boomers. And everybody now is like, how do I keep this functioning as long as I've got this body functioning? So we're trying to get more information about what does it mean to be cognitive healthy. Is there anything I can really do?
Yeah.
And that's why I think Still Alice is such an important message. I mean, your message of like, I want to write a book and I'm going to sell it out of my car and then I want to turn it into a movie and I want someone to win an Oscar. That's, maybe 1 in a million, right?
Yeah, and I didn't set out with any of those wants. It's all been like, okay.
Okay. Well, James Brown over there was one of the people that helped make it, turn it into a film.
He bought the film rights.
He bought the film rights, and
Elizabeth, wherever she is.
Who else? Yeah, Elizabeth Gilpin Stearns, who's been very active in the Alzheimer's community, and myself. And I first became aware of Still Alice at the women's conference when Target brought it to sell it in the Village. And I was like, what is this? Everybody's lining up for this book, Still Alice. And I was watching also at the women's conference, we started programming breakout sessions on Alzheimer's and caregiving, and they started to be standing room only. So I thought to myself, more and more people are becoming, as we age as a society, more and more people were coming to those sessions. They were bringing their kids to those sessions. And so the idea that this is, once again, something that happens to old people, or that we don't need to be concerned about it, or not my brain, is all a fallacy.
Yeah.
And that while it is scary, there's still a lot of hope. And that's one of the things that I always like to try to say, that there is hope out there if we raise the money for research. One of the other things that the federal government allocates about $6 billion for AIDS, about $5 billion for cancer. And now maybe we're up at $600 million for Alzheimer's. And yet it's the most expensive disease in the country. And it's that we haven't been able to actually market it.
Or talk about it. I mean,
Yeah.
part of it is that no one's been talking about it in a really big way.
Right.
And part of the reason, and it is scary, I get it. I mean, I've lived it with my grandmother. And it's scarier because no one's talking about it, right? If it's this thing that we can't really say and name, I mean, it's like Harry Potter, right? The Voldemort guy. Like, if you can't name it, it's terrifying. So if we can begin to, this is Alzheimer's, this is what it looks like. And like heart disease, people used to be terrified of heart disease. And now you go to the doctor probably every year, right? And they take blood and they check your blood pressure. And what are they looking for in your blood? Well, they're checking your cholesterol. What are they doing here? They're checking your blood pressure for heart disease. And you're voluntarily going to get checked for heart disease, and you're not probably terrified to do that. So at some point,
don't know how to ask their doctor though, like, what's up with my
well, they're not going to now, but at some point we're going to get, like you're saying, like cognitive health. You're going to go, at some point we're going to go to the doctor, and it's going to be part of our routine. How's my cognitive health? Because we're checking on our cardiovascular health.
But one of the things I think is also really important is that when you do ask your primary physician, how's my cognitive health, most of the time they'll tell you it's fine, because they don't actually know.
No, they're not equipped
and
yet.
So they're not equipped yet. So that's really important to know. They're not equipped.
No.
And so it's important to ask for a neurologist. It's important, I think, not to just say, when you say, like, I'm noticing that I may be having trouble with words, or it's more than just my keys, and the doctor says, don't worry, you're under stress. Get another opinion, just like you would if you got a cancer diagnosis, just like you would if a parent got a stroke. Because one of the things we've also learned is that now, just kind of kids that are in medical school, they're just now learning about symptoms of Alzheimer's as primary physicians. There's kind of some interesting things going on. I did a story at NBC about, pairing people with Alzheimer's with medical students so that they would begin to see what that's like, because they're really not educated about the brain in the same way. So it's important to be educated yourself. That's why we're asking people to do these brain clubs. Be educated yourself. Be aware of what's going on with your parents. Be aware of your own cognitive health. And just because your primary physician says, don't worry, you're a woman, your early 60s, not going to happen to you, you'll be armed with the facts and the information to maybe ask more questions.